Florida's Female Killers. True Crime That Shook America. Part 2. 18. Leslie DEMENIUK. It was a spring afternoon in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, when a quiet home inside the Sawgrass Country Club became the scene of a tragedy that would stun even seasoned investigators. Leslie DEMENIUK was born April 24, 1969. A mother of twin boys, she had once seemed like a devoted caregiver. But behind the surface was a troubled woman battling inner demons, depression, substance use, and a crumbling personal life. Her marriage to Navy officer Tommy DEMENIUK had collapsed, and she was navigating a storm of emotional instability, now complicated by psychiatric medication. March 17, 2001. Inside her father's home, as her 4-year-old sons, James and John, watched television, Leslie retrieved a .357 Magnum revolver. What happened next would echo through Florida courtrooms for years. With chilling calm, she shot both of her children once, possibly twice, each ending their young lives in an instant. The murders were not impulsive. Investigators determined she had planned it. Leslie later confessed to police, stating, "I shot both boys in the head. I don't know what was going through my head." Her blood alcohol level was more than 3 times the legal limit. Prescription antidepressants had recently been switched from Zoloft to Paxil 2 days before the killings. Her boyfriend, Anthony Ortiz, was the first to discover the scene. He found the boys' lifeless bodies and Leslie unconscious on the bed, the revolver still in her hand. Ortiz, visibly broken, called 911, and in the days that followed he stood by her, blaming the medication, not the woman he'd loved. The defense argued passionately that Leslie was not in her right mind. They brought in experts who described her as suffering from a psychotic break triggered by a dangerous mix of antidepressants and alcohol. One psychologist testified that she believed she was saving her children from a world she no longer understood. But the prosecution pushed back. They showed the jury a clear sequence of choices: phone calls, coherent conversations, calm planning. Their argument was simple: she knew what she was doing, and she knew it was wrong. After a long-delayed trial nearly 5 years later, it took the jury just 3 hours to return a verdict: guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. On January 26, 2006, Leslie DEMENIUK was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, one for each of her sons. She showed no visible emotion as the judgment was handed down. For the father, Tommy DEMENIUK, there was no mention of his former wife in his tearful statement, only the memory of 2 little boys who loved storybooks and trains. Today, Leslie remains behind bars in Florida. No parole, no second chance. Her name lingers in legal circles and mental health debates, cited in arguments over how prescription drugs can affect the mind and whether the law can ever fully account for the chaos of human psychology. In the end, 2 lives were lost. A 3rd was consumed. And the chilling question remains, what if help had come sooner? 19. Venecia Amalia DePaula. In the early hours of August 3, 2009, silence settled over a Tampa apartment until a single gunshot pierced the dark. It was a shot fired not by a stranger, but by the woman who lived there. Venecia Amalia DePaula was 6 months pregnant and standing over the man she once claimed to love. Born November 26, 1978. Venecia DePaula was originally from Palm Beach County, Florida. To those who knew her, she came off as soft-spoken, polite, and well-mannered. But beneath that calm exterior, her life was unraveling. She had left her family behind to be with Felipe Perez, a former minor league baseball player. Their relationship was strained, marked by jealousy, infidelity, and isolation. By the summer of 2009, DePaula was pregnant with his child, but Perez had moved on. He had a new girlfriend, and to him their relationship was over. To DePaula, It wasn't. The events leading up to the shooting were laced with growing desperation. After heated text exchanges in late July, DePaula visited a gun store and tried to purchase a revolver. When her background check stalled, she turned to the classifieds. On August 2nd, she paid cash for a 9mm Beretta semi-automatic. Hours later, she used it. As Felipe slept on the couch, DePaula waited. According to prosecutors, she placed the barrel an inch from his head and pulled the trigger. It was a calculated act, not a moment of chaos. Afterward, she calmly gathered her young daughter, drove across the state to Palm Beach County, and turned herself in. When she walked into a police station, the words she uttered were quiet, almost detached. "I shot my boyfriend. I think I killed him." At trial, her defense didn't deny the killing. Instead, they argued she was severely depressed, claiming she had intended to end her own life, not someone else's. Her lawyer said she blacked out, that she didn't remember pulling the trigger. But Venecia DePaula never testified. The jury never heard the words from her own lips. And the prosecution painted a starkly different picture of a woman fueled by jealousy, hurt by rejection, and unwilling to let go. It took jurors just 3 days to find her guilty of first-degree murder. On February 24, 2011, the judge delivered a life sentence. DePaula showed no emotion, no tears, no apology. As she was led out of the courtroom, she turned to the staff and softly said, "Thank you very much." Today, Venecia DePaula is serving a life sentence in a Florida prison. She gave birth while behind bars. Her children are being raised by her mother. And the memory of Felipe Perez, a father and friend, lives on through the people who watched helplessly as his life was taken by someone he trusted. One chilling detail never admitted at trial, but whispered among those closest to him. In the days before his death, Felipe confided to his wife, "She said she was going to kill me." 20. Christine Falling. In a quiet Florida town in the early 1980s, children were dying young, healthy, and always under the same woman's care. At first, it seemed like terrible luck. But by the time authorities realized what was happening, the truth had already claimed too many lives. Christine Falling was born on March 12, 1963, in Perry, Florida. Her childhood was marked by instability, poverty, and illness. Developmentally delayed, prone to violent outbursts, and suffering from epileptic seizures, she grew up in and out of foster homes and institutions. She was known for disturbing behavior, dropping cats from heights, strangling them, then calling it love. At 14, she married a man more than 10 years her senior. The union lasted just 6 weeks, ending in violence. Afterward, Christine began seeking attention through endless hospital visits for phantom illnesses. But it was her reputation as a babysitter, a seemingly gentle, eager caretaker, that masked something far more sinister. On February 28, 1980, 2-year-old Cassidy Johnson died while in Christine's care. She claimed the child fell from a crib. The autopsy revealed blunt trauma, but no charges were filed. The case went cold. Later that year, she moved to Lakeland. Just months in 4-year-old Jeffrey Davis suddenly stopped breathing while napping. A heart condition was blamed. 3 days later at his funeral, Christine was babysitting his cousin, 2-year-old Joseph Spring. He died the same way. A virus was suspected. Again, Christine slipped away without suspicion. In July 1981, she took a housekeeping job. On her first day, the elderly man she worked for collapsed and died. Authorities chalked it up to age. Then came Jennifer Daniels, Christine's own niece. After a simple stop at a market, the baby left in Christine's care had inexplicably stopped breathing. It was ruled sudden infant death syndrome. It wasn't. On July 2nd, 1982, everything changed. 10-week-old Travis Coleman died after Christine babysat him. This time, the autopsy told a different story, signs of internal injuries consistent with suffocation. Christine Falling was brought in for questioning. There, she quietly confessed to killing 3 children. Her method, she said, was smotheration, a word she coined for placing a blanket over their faces. She claimed disembodied voices had ordered her to do it. "I don't know why I done what I done," she said. "The way I done it, I seen it on TV shows. I had my own way, though. Simple and easy. No one could hear them scream." On December 3, 1982, Christine Falling was convicted of 3 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for at least 25 years. She was 19 years old. Today, she remains behind bars. Her case is still studied as one of the rare instances of a female serial killer who targeted children. Her chilling confession and the system's failure to connect the deaths sooner leave an unsettling legacy. Sometimes, the danger doesn't hide in the shadows. It walks in the front door with a smile holding a baby. 21. Cassidy GOODSON. In the quiet town of Lakeland, Florida, a tragedy unfolded behind closed doors, a secret hidden not just from a family, but from an entire community. And when it came to light, it stunned even the most seasoned investigators. Cassidy GOODSON was just 14 years old in 2012. An average teenager on the surface. She played softball, went to school, and helped around the house. But beneath the routine was something she kept to herself. She was pregnant. Terrified of how her parents would react, Cassidy wore loose clothing, avoided questions, and even faked pregnancy test results. No one suspected a thing. Not her mother, not her teachers, not even her closest friends. In her words, she believed the truth would destroy the bond she had with her family. On September 19th, Cassidy gave birth alone in her bathroom. According to investigators, she used a pair of scissors to assist with the labor. The baby, a full-term 9.5-pound boy, was alive. Cassidy felt for a pulse. There was one, and then she wrapped her hands around the infant's neck and held on until he stopped moving. She cleaned the scene, bathed herself and the child, and hid the body in a shoebox tucked beneath dirty clothes in her bedroom. 3 days later, her mother noticed a strange smell. Searching through the room, she discovered the box and what was inside. Cassidy's secret was no longer her own. When questioned, Cassidy calmly confessed. In a reenactment with detectives, she used a Santa Claus doll to demonstrate how she ended her baby's life. "I didn't want to get in trouble," she said, "so I made it stop breathing." Charged with first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse, Cassidy initially faced trial as an adult. But as the facts emerged, even prosecutors began to rethink what justice should look like for a child who had never been in trouble before. In December 2012, Cassidy took a plea deal. She admitted guilt to manslaughter and was sentenced to 18 months in a maximum security juvenile facility, followed by probation. It was a rare decision, one that recognized both the gravity of her actions and the vulnerability of her age. The judge, prosecutors, and even Sheriff Grady Judd agreed punishing her as an adult would have meant a second life lost. The challenge now, Judd said, is making sure she never ends up in the system again. Cassidy GOODSON served her sentence. She was released with strict conditions and the chance to finish high school. Her future remains uncertain, but the consequences of that one night will follow her forever. This case is not just about a crime, it's about the failure to ask the hard questions, to notice the signs, and to talk about the things we'd rather avoid. Sometimes the silence around us is louder than we think. 22. Sheila GRAHAM-TROTT. In the seaside town of Indialantic, Florida, where ocean breezes sweep over quiet streets, jealousy and betrayal turned deadly. On the evening of February 16, 2010, a love triangle shattered the lives of 3 families and led to a murder that stunned the community. Sheila GRAHAM-TROTT was once a respected real estate agent, a mother and the estranged wife of former Mayor Dan Trott. Intelligent and composed, she had studied oceanography and enjoyed gardening. But beneath that calm exterior was a storm of resentment. Her former friend Kelly Brennan, a charismatic nurse, had begun dating Dan Trott after the couple's separation. For Sheila, it wasn't just a betrayal, it was personal. That night, Brennan vanished without a trace. Hours earlier, she had called a friend at 7:48 p.m., planning to meet her personal trainer. She never arrived. Investigators believe that somewhere between that call and 8:15 p.m., she was ambushed. Prosecutors say Sheila left home under the guise of a Walmart trip, parked near Brennan's home, and waited. They believe she struck Brennan from behind with a hammer, then dragged her body to a waiting vehicle. By the next morning, Brennan's body was found near Mark's Landing, a remote beach access 13 miles away. The key to the case: a chilling confession hidden in a so-called dream. That same night, Sheila's sons testified that she suddenly woke from sleep, claiming she dreamed that Kelly had been hurt. She insisted on driving them to a beach parking lot, where to their horror, they found a body in the brush. They returned home in silence. One son called their grandmother. Hours later, Sheila's own mother phoned 911. In court, the prosecution painted a picture of premeditation. Sheila, they argued, wore protective clothing, cleaned up afterward, and used her access as a realtor to hide evidence. Though the murder weapon was never recovered, the medical examiner confirmed Brennan's injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma likely inflicted by a hammer. The defense pointed to a lack of physical evidence. No fingerprints, no weapon, and minimal blood evidence tested. They suggested Kelly's estranged husband had a motive and violent history. But the circumstantial weight of Sheila's movements, her son's testimonies, and her cryptic dream proved too much to ignore. On September 17, 2014, a jury found Sheila GRAHAM-TROTT guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Today, Sheila remains behind bars in Florida. She maintains her innocence. But to those who loved Kelly Brennan, the verdict brought closure, if not peace. A life was taken not in a moment of passion, but in what prosecutors called a calculated act of control. In a case fueled by pride, betrayal, and obsession, one haunting line still echoes from the courtroom. She didn't just lose her husband, she wanted to erase the woman who took her place. 23. Chelsea HUGGETT. Hernando, Florida. A small, quiet town that became the setting for a heartbreaking and unforgettable tragedy. On April 26, 2013, 2-year-old Aaliyah Marie Branham was found unresponsive in her home. Hours later, she was pronounced dead at the hospital. The cause: blunt force trauma to the head. The person responsible, her own mother. Chelsea Marie HUGGETT, born in 1990, was a former Army service member. She struggled with explosive anger and what she described as a chemical imbalance. Her history included warning signs, episodes of violence, unpredictable behavior, and multiple visits from Child Protective Services. But each time the danger was overlooked. No one intervened in time. Aaliyah was a special needs child. She couldn't speak, required physical therapy, and depended on her mother for everything. On the night of her death, HUGGETT later told investigators that Aaliyah had been whining, climbing on her, and refusing to sleep. In a moment of rage, HUGGETT shook her daughter violently, covered her mouth to stop the crying, and then slammed her small head against the wall. The toddler lost consciousness. Instead of calling for help, HUGGETT laid next to her child, knowing something was wrong, but never picked up the phone. She admitted she was afraid doctors would see the bruises and arrest her. By the time a roommate discovered Aaliyah's body and called 911, it was too late. 2 days after the incident, HUGGETT was arrested. At the time, she was 8 months pregnant with her second child. During questioning, she confessed to shaking Aaliyah on multiple occasions and admitted to the fatal blow that fractured the child's skull. In court, wearing an orange jumpsuit, HUGGETT sat silently as prosecutors described the horrific injuries her daughter had suffered. Her own family, including her mother and sister, pleaded with the judge to hand down the maximum sentence. "Please sentence Aaliyah's killer to the full 30 years, her mother said. Her sister added, "It takes a soulless person to harm a child and a demon to hurt their own flesh and blood." On April 23, 2014, Judge Richard Howard did exactly that. He sentenced Chelsea HUGGETT to 30 years in state prison. In his words, "There isn't a square inch of this child's face that wasn't beaten." Aaliyah's death triggered public outrage, not just because of the crime, but because of how many opportunities the system had to intervene. Child welfare agencies had received multiple reports of bruises, neglect, even attempted smothering, but failed to take meaningful action. In the wake of the tragedy, HUGGETT's parents launched Aaliyah's Project, a nonprofit aimed at helping struggling parents before it's too late. Today, HUGGETT is serving her sentence in a Florida prison. Her second daughter, Amalia, was born shortly after the arrest and is being raised by relatives. HUGGETT is not allowed contact. Aaliyah's story is more than just a crime. It's a warning about missed signs, about silent suffering, and about the devastating cost of inaction when help is needed but never comes. 24. Ashley Humphrey. Ashley Laney was just 19 when she met Timothy Tracy Humphrey, a muscular, charming personal trainer twice her age with a history he kept well hidden. She worked at a smoothie shop in Brandon, Florida. He trained at a nearby gym. What started as flirtation quickly became obsession. Within a year, she was in love living with him and willing to do anything he asked, even kill. Timothy Humphrey was no stranger to law enforcement. A convicted felon with prior charges ranging from grand theft auto to aggravated assault, he had a violent past, especially toward women. One of them was Sandra "Sandy" Razzo, his ex-girlfriend and a bartender in Pinellas Park. Sandy had accused him of a brutal attack in 2002, and he was set to face trial in August 2003. But Sandy would never make it to court. On July 4, 2003, Ashley and Tracy got married. The very next night, 37-year-old Sandy Razzo was gunned down in her garage just after returning home from work. She was shot 8 times. The killer left no fingerprints, no shell casings, just questions. Tracy had an alibi. He was home ordering pizza, and it held until investigators noticed Ashley was missing during the time of the murder. Cell tower data placed her in Pinellas Park, near Sandy's home. Then came the confession. Ashley admitted to pulling the trigger, but claimed Tracy had orchestrated it all. She described a twisted plan driven by fear and misplaced love. Tracy didn't want to go back to prison, and Ashley didn't want to lose him. He coached her on how to stalk Sandy, what disguise to wear, even what gun to use. The night of the murder, she waited outside Sandy's workplace for hours. When Sandy finally drove home, Ashley followed, approached the car, and opened fire. In exchange for testifying against her husband, Ashley took a plea deal, 25 years for second-degree murder. In 2006, she took the stand describing in chilling detail how the murder was planned like a mission. Tracy, she said, wasn't just complicit. He was the mastermind. Tracy denied it all. He claimed Ashley acted alone. But the evidence was overwhelming, dozens of phone calls between the couple the night of the murder, a past riddled with violence, and testimony from Ashley that left the courtroom in stunned silence. On February 25, 2006, a jury found Timothy Humphrey guilty of first-degree murder. Though prosecutors sought the death penalty, the jury sentenced him to life in prison without parole. Today, Ashley Humphrey remains incarcerated, scheduled for release in late 2028. Tracy is serving his sentence at Everglades Correctional Institution. The two haven't spoken in years. The murder of Sandy Rozzo is a tragic story of manipulation, control, and a young woman who mistook control for devotion. Sandy lost her life trying to speak the truth. In a final bitter twist, her silence came only days before she was set to testify. Sometimes the most dangerous love stories don't end at the altar. They end in a garage with a gun and a silence that lasts forever. 25. Deidre Michelle Hunt. In the fall of 1989, a quiet pocket of Volusia County, Florida, became the backdrop for a murder plot so chilling it would haunt the courtroom for nearly a decade. At the center of it stood a 20-year-old bartender, Deidre Hunt, whose transformation from troubled young woman to cold-blooded killer stunned even seasoned investigators. Deidre Hunt had drifted into Daytona Beach from New Hampshire, escaping a turbulent upbringing marked by poverty and mental illness. She found work at a local pool hall, Top Shots, owned by Costa Fotopoulos, a man twice her age and married to Lisa Fotopoulos, a successful businesswoman. But Costa wanted more than Deidre's bartending skills. Their affair quickly spiraled into something darker. Kevin Ramsey, a 19-year-old co-worker, threatened to expose Costa's counterfeit money scheme. That made him a problem. Costa's solution, a test. He lured Kevin to a secluded shooting range under the guise of a secret club initiation. Deidre, armed with a .22 pistol and under Costa's threats, carried out the execution while he videotaped every second. Kevin was tied to a tree. Deidre shot him 3 times in the chest and once more in the head. But that was just the beginning. When Lisa discovered the affair and threatened divorce, Costa plotted again. Divorce meant financial ruin. Murder meant a $700,000 insurance payout. Using the Ramsey video as leverage, Costa coerced Deidre to hire someone to kill his wife. The first attempts failed, but eventually Brian Chase, a local 18-year-old, agreed to do it. On the night of November 4, 1989, Chase entered the Fotopoulos home. Lisa was asleep. He shot her once in the head, but Lisa survived. Chase, however, did not. Costa sat up in bed and shot him repeatedly, staging the scene to look like a failed home invasion. The plan unraveled quickly. Police found the murder weapon, the videotape, and enough evidence to charge both Costa and Deidre with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Deidre pleaded guilty and was sentenced to death in 1990. But the case took a stunning turn. Her defense attorney had secretly sold her story to a TV tabloid. In 1998, her guilty plea was withdrawn. She stood trial again, and although her convictions were upheld, her death sentence was overturned. Deidre Hunt now serves 2 life sentences at Homestead Correctional Institution. Costa Fotopoulos remains on death row. Was Deidre a remorseless killer or a manipulated pawn trapped in a violent man's control? Her words in court were chilling. "If I hadn't done it, I would have died." Lisa Fotopoulos, now remarried, still carries a bullet in her skull, an unspoken legacy of the night she was meant to die. The victims' families call life imprisonment too good for Deidre. Others argue she was doomed long before the first trigger was pulled. In the end, the truth lies somewhere between the shadows of abuse and the finality of 2 young lives lost forever. 26. Andrea Hicks Jackson. In the early morning hours of May 16, 1983, a routine arrest on the streets of Jacksonville, Florida, spiraled into a moment that would define a courtroom saga lasting nearly 2 decades. Andrea Hicks Jackson, born February 26, 1958, was a 25-year-old woman with a history of minor offenses when she crossed paths with Officer Gary Bevel. Bevel, a 29-year-old police officer known for his professionalism and calm demeanor, had approached Jackson to arrest her on charges of filing a false police report. What should have been a standard detainment escalated in seconds. As Officer Bevel attempted to place Jackson into his patrol car, she resisted. Then, according to prosecutors, she dropped her keys, drew a firearm, and opened fire, striking Bevel 6 times. He died at the scene. Jackson fled but was apprehended the same day. She claimed it wasn't premeditated. Prosecutors and multiple juries disagreed. In 1984, she was sentenced to death. But that was just the beginning. Over the next 17 years, Andrea Jackson's sentence would be overturned not once but 4 times. Each time the reason was different. Improper jury instructions, inappropriate comments by officials, procedural missteps, constitutional technicalities. 4 separate juries, including one that voted unanimously, recommended the death penalty. 4 times Florida's Supreme Court said the process had been flawed. The case became a lightning rod, not just in Jacksonville, but statewide. To many, Officer Bevel's murder symbolized an attack on law and order, and yet the justice system appeared stuck in a cycle it couldn't escape. Even Chief Judge Donald Moran, who presided over every sentencing, began to express frustration with the endless reversals. In June 2000, after nearly 2 decades of legal back and forth, Judge Moran stunned the courtroom. He vacated the death sentence and resentenced Jackson to life in prison. Though the judge said it was without parole, the laws in place at the time of the murder made her eligible for release as early as 2009. To Jackson's defense team, the sentence reflected reality, no plan, no calculated motive, and a flawed trial history. To law enforcement and the public, it felt like a betrayal. She didn't want to go back to jail, one prosecutor argued, so she made sure the officer didn't live to take her. Today, Andrea Hicks Jackson serves a life sentence in Florida. Though eligible for parole, her name rarely surfaces in public debate. The case, however, remains a study in legal endurance where due process clashed with public outcry, and where 4 death sentences ultimately gave way to 1 life term. Officer Gary Bevel's name lives on in Jacksonville, memorialized not only as a fallen officer, but as the center of one of Florida's most contested capital cases. And Andrea Hicks Jackson, a woman once 5 days from execution, now lives out her days behind bars, as a reminder of how complex justice can be when law rights and retribution collide. 27. Linda T. Jones. In the quiet lakeside community of Lake Asbury, Florida, the life of Jack and Linda Jones seemed from the outside like the picture of stability. Married nearly 30 years, they had raised 2 daughters and built a life many would envy. But behind closed doors, betrayal was unraveling everything. Linda Jones, born May 27, 1947, was known as a capable professional and devoted mother. But when her daughters left home, Linda opened her life to someone else, a troubled teenage girl named Carrie, whom she had taken under her wing from work. What began as a gesture of kindness turned into a nightmare. Carrie and Jack Jones. Linda's husband began an affair. Linda was blindsided. She kicked Carrie out and demanded Jack end the relationship. For a time, things appeared to settle. But then Linda discovered Jack had moved Carrie into an apartment and had given her an engagement ring. The betrayal cut deeper than ever. Just weeks later, on the night of November 7, 1995, Jack Jones was found dead, savagely beaten, in the home he shared with Linda. Linda claimed it was a home invasion. She told police masked men broke in, tied her up, and attacked her husband. But from the beginning, investigators sensed something was off. Her story didn't add up. There were no signs of forced entry, and oddly, she appeared unharmed. A witness's description of a van fleeing the scene led investigators to Donald Bradley, a local landscaper, and one of Linda's clients. Soon, the story unraveled. Bradley, along with 2 brothers he had recruited, Brian and Patrick McWhite, was arrested. Faced with mounting evidence, the McWhites came forward. What they revealed shocked even seasoned detectives. The entire crime, they said, had been orchestrated by Linda Jones. According to their testimony, Linda offered Bradley money to kill her husband. She left the door unlocked. She kept the lights off. She told them when Jack would be home. Donald Bradley entered the house with a weapon and beat Jack to death while Linda watched, barely intervening. Phone records, witness accounts, and the killer's confessions painted a damning picture. Prosecutors argued that Linda, humiliated and enraged by her husband's affair, had decided that murder was easier than divorce. And with a $500,000 life insurance policy on the line, the motive became chillingly clear. In 1997, Linda Jones stood trial for first-degree murder. The jury found her guilty, and she was sentenced to life in prison. Donald Bradley, the man who carried out the attack, was sentenced to death. Today, Linda Jones remains behind bars in Florida, serving a life sentence. She maintains her innocence, but the evidence and the testimonies of those she once conspired with tell another story. This case serves as a haunting reminder: betrayal can destroy lives, but when vengeance enters the equation, the consequences can be deadly. And in a home once built on promises and love, all that's left is silence. 28. Laisha Latae LANDRUM. In the summer of 2004, Tampa, Florida became the backdrop of a tragedy born from jealousy, youth, and rage. At just 16 years old, Laisha Latae LANDRUM made a choice that would end one life and forever change many others, including her own. Laisha was a teenager navigating early motherhood and the complexities of a troubled relationship. She lived with her boyfriend, Rocky Almestica Jr., and had just given birth to his child. But Rocky had a past, and in that past was Emily Clemens, also 16, his ex-girlfriend. Rumors swirled that Emily and Rocky were still in contact, perhaps even rekindling their connection. On June 9, 2004, that tension exploded. That night, Emily Clemens was lured to the Amaretto Apartments, where Laisha and Rocky lived. What happened next would shock the community. Prosecutors say Laisha and Rocky attacked Emily using whatever they could find: kitchen pots, a hammer, even a stereo. Emily was struck over 30 times. Then, wrapped in a blanket, her body was dumped into a nearby trash bin. What her attackers didn't expect was that Emily was still alive. Hours later, neighbors heard faint banging coming from the dumpster. When deputies arrived, they discovered Emily barely clinging to life. She was rushed to the hospital but died shortly after. The next day, police arrested both LANDRUM and Almestica. The evidence was damning. Witnesses had seen them at the trash bins. One friend testified that Laisha had asked him to help get rid of the body. He refused and called authorities. Laisha was charged with first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. She claimed self-defense, alleging that Emily had barged into their apartment and attacked her. But the jury didn't believe it. At trial, prosecutors argued the motive was clear: Laisha's jealousy had turned deadly. A voicemail played in court captured her warning Emily, "Stay away from my man or I'll kill you." In February 2006, nearly 2 years after the murder, Laisha LANDRUM was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Rocky Almestica had already received the same sentence the year prior. At her sentencing, Laisha finally spoke, telling Emily's family she was sorry. But Emily's father, Brett Clemens, wasn't convinced. He called her tears crocodile tears and said nothing could undo the pain she caused. In a moment that pierced the courtroom silence, Laisha stood and said, "I'm trying to be strong for my family." But the court was unmoved. Today, Laisha remains incarcerated, serving out a life sentence before she even had the chance to finish growing up. Her daughter, just a baby at the time, is being raised without her. And Emily Clemens, described as kind, poetic, and full of dreams, never got the chance to live out her teenage years. Her life was stolen by someone just like her, young, emotional, and overwhelmed. This case is a haunting reminder of how fast emotions can escalate, and how jealousy, unchecked, can destroy lives in an instant. One decision, one moment, and nothing was ever the same again. 29. Virginia Gail LARZELERE, Tampa, Florida. Summer of 2004. What began as a quiet June night ended in tragedy, and a young life cut short. Laisha Latae LANDRUM was just 16 years old when her name became synonymous with one of the most shocking juvenile homicide cases in the state. A teenager, a new mother, and fiercely possessive of her boyfriend, Rocky Almastica Jr. Laisha's story spiraled from teenage insecurity into irreversible violence. Rocky wasn't just Laisha's boyfriend, he was also Emily Clemens's ex, and rumors had started to swirl that Emily and Rocky were still in contact. Laisha, already raising a baby with Rocky, was furious. In the weeks leading up to the crime, her jealousy became impossible to ignore. Friends recalled threats. Voicemails surfaced, one chillingly direct, "You stay away from my man or I'll kill you." On June 9, 2004, Laisha and Rocky lured Emily to their apartment at the Amaretto complex. No one expected what would come next. Investigators believe the confrontation turned violent fast. Laisha and Rocky struck Emily repeatedly with whatever they could grab: kitchen pots, a hammer, even a boombox. More than 30 blows. Then, assuming she was dead, they wrapped her in a blanket and dumped her in a nearby dumpster. But Emily wasn't gone, at least not yet. In the early hours of June 10th, neighbors heard faint thumping noises coming from the trash bin. Thinking it might be an animal, they called 911. Deputies arrived and discovered Emily barely alive among the trash. She died shortly after at the hospital. By the next day, Laisha and Rocky were arrested. The courtroom drama that followed gripped the Tampa community. Prosecutors painted Laisha as the jealous instigator, the driving force behind the attack. The defense argued that Emily had started the fight, that Laisha acted in fear. But the evidence was damning testimony from friends' phone records and a mountain of forensic data. During sentencing, Laisha stood before Emily's grieving parents. She cried, apologized, said she wished she could take it all back. Emily's father called it an act, saying any tears shed by the defendant have been crocodile tears. The judge agreed with the prosecution. Laisha was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Rocky had already received the same sentence. Today, Laisha remains behind bars. Her daughter, just months old at the time, is growing up without her mother. Emily Clemens, described as sweet, artistic, and full of promise, never got the chance to graduate, to chase her dreams, or to live out her teenage years. This wasn't a crime of hardened criminals. It was a moment of youthful rage and jealousy that turned fatal. One fueled by possessiveness, fear, and desperation. 3 young lives destroyed in a single night. In the end, the case of Laisha LANDRUM reminds us just how quickly things can escalate and how devastating the consequences of unchecked emotion can be. 30. Tivasha LOGAN, Lakeland, Florida. November 1st, 2009. In a modest home on Sunshine Drive, paramedics responded to a desperate 911 call. A 5-month-old baby girl wasn't breathing. Her name was Chantazia Gardner. By the time help arrived, it was already too late. The case that followed would uncover a heartbreaking story, not of violence in the traditional sense, but of neglect, silence, and a fatal decision that left a community stunned. Tivasha LOGAN was 25 years old, a mother of 6, including newborn Chantazia. On paper, she had access to support government assistance, food stamps, Medicaid, even formula through the WIC program. But when investigators arrived, they found a fridge stocked with food for everyone except the baby. The infant weighed just 6 pounds. For a 5-month-old, that number wasn't just low, it was dangerously abnormal. Medical records revealed that Chantazia had left the hospital months earlier at a healthy 7 pounds and 8 ounces. Somehow she had lost weight instead of gaining it. What had happened in that home, detectives soon learned that Logan had been feeding her baby watered-down formula diluted to 1/3 the recommended strength. She admitted she noticed her daughter losing weight, but instead of going to the hospital, she waited. Why? Because she feared what might happen to her other children if authorities got involved. That decision became the turning point. Logan later told detectives she had made a doctor's appointment for the following day, November 2nd, but Chantasia died the morning before. Prosecutors charged Tivasha Logan with first-degree murder and aggravated manslaughter of a child. During the trial, her defense argued she never meant to harm her baby. They presented evidence that Logan had a limited intellectual capacity functioning at the reading level of a 4th grader and struggled to grasp the severity of her child's condition. But the jury saw it differently. After deliberating for 7 hours, they returned a guilty verdict on both counts. The courtroom was quiet as Logan clutched a pink Bible, tears running down her face. Her sentence was mandatory life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her co-defendant, the baby's father, Chauncey Gardner, faces similar charges and awaits trial. The story of Tivasha Logan is one of many layers: poverty, fear, limited education, and a system that may have missed warning signs. But it's also a case that raises difficult questions. At what point does neglect become criminal? And how does fear override the instinct to seek help? Today, Logan remains behind bars serving a life sentence. Her surviving children live with relatives, and the name Chantasia Gardner serves as a solemn reminder. Sometimes tragedy comes not from what's done, but from what isn't. A quiet home, a missed warning, a life too short, and a silence that spoke louder than words. 31. Amanda K. Logue. By day, Amanda Logue was a model adult film actress, an online persona known as Sunny Day. Her life was filled with lights, cameras, and a curated image of confidence. But behind the stage name was a different reality, one that would eventually lead to a deadly crime that shocked even seasoned investigators. Born in Georgia in 1982, Amanda's early years offered little indication of what was to come. She dabbled in fashion, owned a lingerie store, and transitioned into the adult entertainment industry. That's where she met Jason Andrews, a British-accented DJ and fellow adult performer. The chemistry between them was instant and intense, but their connection, fueled by obsession and recklessness, would spiral into something far more sinister. In May 2010, the couple was invited to a sex party hosted by Dennis Scooter Abrahamson, a 41-year-old tattoo parlor owner in Newport Richey, Florida. Amanda had been hired to perform privately for him. What she didn't reveal was that she and Jason were planning something else entirely. Text messages exchanged before the party revealed a disturbing plan. Andrews instructed Amanda to keep eyes for a knife and described how they'd carry out an attack. Amanda replied with chilling eagerness. Their goal: take whatever cash and valuables they could and disappear. In the early morning hours of May 15th, after the party had ended and the guests had left, Amanda remained in the house. Andrews waited outside in the car, texting her. The victim, unaware, was reportedly relaxed, playing music, completely unaware of what was coming. Dennis Abrahamson was found the next day by a family member. He was lying on a massage table. His valuables were missing. His killers were already long gone. Initially, Amanda and Jason blended back into normalcy. They posted on social media, watched movies, and acted as if nothing had happened, but authorities were already on their trail. Just 3 days after the murder, the couple was arrested while trying to use Abrahamson's credit card. At the time, there wasn't enough evidence to hold them. They were released, but not for long. Digital forensics later recovered dozens of text messages that exposed their plan in chilling detail. In 2012, Amanda Logue pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her partner, Jason Andrews, received life without parole after admitting guilt to first-degree murder. Amanda was sentenced to 40 years in a Florida prison. No cameras, no stage names, just silence. In court, the victim's family struggled to make sense of the loss. "You're not a person," said Abrahamson's cousin. "You're an evil being." Amanda Logue's story is one of contrasts, a public persona built on performance and fantasy, masking a descent into darkness, fueled by greed, manipulation, and a toxic relationship. Behind the bright lights and curated images was a plan that ended a life, devastated a family, and left a permanent stain on everyone involved. From Sunny Day to convicted killer Amanda Logue is now defined not by who she pretended to be, but by what she chose to do. 32. Jana Porter Mallory. In the quiet neighborhood of South Tampa, Florida, a trusted neighbor became a silent predator. Jana Porter Mallory, born in 1965, lived just a few doors down from 79-year-old Peggy Merman, a woman whose independence was slipping away due to declining health. Bound to a wheelchair, Peggy needed help. What she got was something far more sinister. In late 2007, while Peggy's home underwent major renovations, Mallory offered a helping hand and a place to stay. She welcomed the elderly woman into her home. On the surface, it seemed like a kind gesture, but behind closed doors, something far more calculated was unfolding. Jana Mallory was no stranger to deception. She had a prior conviction for fraudulent use of personal information, but this time her actions would go far beyond identity theft. Over the course of 4 months, Mallory not only took over Peggy's care, feeding her, bathing, her administering medications, she also quietly drained her financially. She wrote checks from Peggy's accounts, made ATM withdrawals, racked up charges on credit cards, and pawned jewelry. By the time it was over, more than $50,000 was gone. As Peggy's health rapidly declined, her daughter Janice noticed a disturbing shift. Her once daily calls with her mother stopped. Instead, she received second-hand updates from Mallory. "She's sleeping," Mallory would say. "She's resting." But something didn't sit right. Then, in March 2008, Mallory made a chilling call. Peggy had passed away. What initially appeared to be a tragic but natural end took a sharp turn. When Janice tried to access her mother's bank accounts to cover funeral expenses, she found one account closed and another thousands of dollars overdrawn. The red flags were undeniable. Investigators stepped in, uncovering a paper trail of financial exploitation and a disturbing toxicology report. Peggy Merman had been given doses of medication more than 10 times higher than prescribed. Painkillers and antidepressants, along with a sleep aid she'd never been prescribed, were found in her system. The conclusion was devastating. Peggy had been slowly poisoned. When questioned, Mallory couldn't explain the overdoses. She couldn't justify the missing funds. Eventually, she was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and aggravated abuse of the elderly. In 2013, after years of investigation and legal proceedings, Jana Mallory was sentenced to 30 years in prison, followed by probation. She remains incarcerated today. This case wasn't about sudden violence. It was about patience, proximity, and premeditation. A woman trusted as a caregiver used that role as a cover for calculated harm. The betrayal was quiet, slow-moving, and ultimately fatal. As Peggy's daughter would later say, "It still feels like the day she passed. It hurts." A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't strangers at all, but those we let through the front door. Jana Mallory offered help. What she delivered was a fatal dose of betrayal. 33. Ruby McCOLLUM. In the sweltering summer of 1952, a single gunshot shattered the quiet town of Live Oak, Florida, and with it the silence surrounding a dark, unspoken legacy in the Jim Crow South. Ruby McCOLLUM was no ordinary woman. Born in 1909 in Zuber, Florida, she was educated, married, and financially comfortable part of the small black upper class built on her husband's success in the bolita gambling business. But beneath her composed surface was a storm of trauma that would erupt on August 3, 1952. That Sunday morning, Ruby entered the office of Dr. C. Leroy Adams, a respected physician and newly elected state senator, and shot him dead. When police arrived, Ruby didn't flee. She handed over the gun and simply said, "I had to do it." But why, that question, would divide a state capture national headlines and expose the shadows of power, race, and silence that had long been protected in the Deep South. Ruby claimed that Dr. Adams had repeatedly forced her into a relationship she never consented to, that he had raped her, controlled her, and fathered one of her children. In the era of paramour rights, such abuses were rarely spoken of, let alone challenged in court. But Ruby did both, and for that she was charged with first-degree murder. The trial that followed was as much a reflection of Southern society as it was a legal proceeding. Ruby stood alone, black female, and accused before an all-white, all-male jury. Her defense was denied the chance to fully present her story. 38 times her attorneys were blocked from allowing her to speak the truth behind her actions. 38 objections. 38 silences. On December 20th, 1952, Ruby McCOLLUM was found guilty and sentenced to death. But the story didn't end there. So, 2 years later, her conviction was overturned not because of her testimony, but due to a procedural error. The judge had failed to attend the jury's visit to the crime scene. At her second trial, Ruby was declared mentally incompetent and confined to a psychiatric hospital in Chattahoochee, Florida. She remained there for nearly 20 years. In 1974, she was quietly released. She lived out the rest of her life in a care facility near Ocala, passing away in 1992 at the age of 82. Today, Ruby McCollum's name has faded from headlines, but her legacy endures. Her case forced a reckoning with the unspoken power dynamics of the South. It challenged assumptions about race, gender, and consent in a segregated society. And it raised a chilling question: how many voices like hers were never heard at all? Zora Neale Hurston, who covered the trial for the Pittsburgh Courier, called it the death knell for paramour rights. But more than that, it was a rare moment in history where a black woman demanded to be seen not as a victim, not as a statistic, but as a human being who had reached her breaking point. Ruby McCollum's story may have been silenced in court, but history at last is listening. 34. Jennifer MEE. She was once a teenage curiosity, a girl whose uncontrollable hiccups baffled doctors and charmed national television audiences. But 3 years after that moment in the spotlight, Jennifer MEE's name returned to headlines, this time for murder. Born in 1991 in Florida, MEE first captured public attention at just 15 years old when she hiccuped up to 50 times a minute for 5 agonizing weeks. Her struggle drew media sympathy, and her brief fame even landed her on the Today Show. But behind the cameras, Jennifer's life was unraveling. She left school early, drifted from home, and by 19 was living a transient life with 2 men in St. Petersburg. Then, on the night of October 23, 2010, everything changed. Authorities say MEE used a social networking site to lure 22-year-old Shannon Griffin to a vacant home under the pretense of a small drug deal. But there was no marijuana. Instead, 2 of her roommates, Laren Rayford and Lamont Newton, were waiting. A robbery was planned. Something went wrong. Griffin resisted. He was shot multiple times. He died in that dark alleyway for just $50. MEE didn't pull the trigger. But in Florida, if you participate in a robbery that results in a death even indirectly, you can still be charged with first-degree murder. And Jennifer was. When questioned by police, Mee made a quiet but devastating confession in a recorded call from jail to her mother. She sobbed, "I didn't kill nobody. I set everything up. It all went wrong, Mom." That recording became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Her trial began in 2013. The defense painted her as a frightened, mentally ill young woman, diagnosed with schizophrenia and Tourette's syndrome, a girl out of her depth and manipulated by those around her. Her lawyer argued she never intended for anyone to die. But the jury deliberated only 4 hours. Guilty of first-degree murder. Mandatory sentence life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mee wept openly in court. Some jurors did too. Her accomplice Rayford had already received a life sentence. The third defendant, Newton, awaited trial. And Jennifer Mee, the girl once known across the country as the Hiccup Girl, would now be remembered for something far darker. This case raised haunting questions about identity, mental health, and the weight of choices made by young people in desperate circumstances. Was Mee a cold planner of a deadly scheme or a lost teenager caught in something she couldn't control? In one moment, she had been a symbol of medical mystery. In the next, a cautionary tale. As of today, Jennifer Mee remains incarcerated in a Florida state prison serving life for a crime she did not physically commit, but in the eyes of the law helped orchestrate. The hiccups may have stopped long ago, but the consequences of that single night echo on. And in her own words, it just went downhill. 35. Brittany Miles. On a warm May morning in 2011, what began as a routine DUI stop spiraled into a deadly high-speed chase, one that would end in tragedy for a family, a community, and a young mother named Brittany Miles. At just 21 years old, Brittany was already teetering on the edge. Once described as a loving parent and a kind daughter, her life had unraveled after a car accident left her dependent on prescription painkillers. To fund her addiction, she worked nights at a local strip club in Port Richey, Florida. Behind the makeup and stage lights, Brittany was fighting a battle she was slowly losing. On the morning of May 10th, she was supposed to be in court facing a custody hearing that could determine whether she would keep her young son. But instead, she woke up disoriented at a friend's house still under the influence of Xanax and oxycodone. Stopped for erratic driving, she failed sobriety tests and was arrested for DUI. As she sat in the back of a patrol car, panic took over. She slipped out of her handcuffs, opened the car door, and ran. Within seconds, she was back in her red Dodge Ram truck and speeding north on US 19 with a sheriff's deputy clinging to the side. What happened next would change everything. As she accelerated, Deputy Ashley Grady fell from the moving vehicle, sustaining serious injuries. Still, Brittany didn't stop. Deputies pursued her for nearly 7 miles as she reached speeds over 100 miles per hour. Then, at the County Line Road intersection, 66-year-old motorcyclist Henry McCain was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Brittany's truck plowed through the red light and struck McCain. He died at the scene. Brittany kept going for another mile before her mangled truck finally came to a stop. She fled on foot, but was quickly tackled and taken into custody. Under Florida law, a person who causes a death during the commission of a felony such as escape can be charged with first-degree felony murder. And despite pleas that her actions weren't intentional, that she was high and terrified of losing her child, the law was clear. During the trial, Brittany took the stand. Tearful, remorseful, and barely audible, she admitted to everything. "I ran. I panicked. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," she said. But her apology came too late. On March 7, 2013, Brittany Miles was convicted of first-degree felony murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For her crimes in Pasco County, including battery on a law enforcement officer and DUI, she had already received 15 years. But it was the death of Henry McCain, a funeral director on his way to meet friends, that sealed her fate. Now Brittany sits behind bars, a stark example of how addiction, fear, and a single moment of panic can derail multiple lives. As Judge Daniel Merritt said the day he sentenced her, "There is one life gone, and essentially another about to be so." And in Brittany's own quiet words, "I just wanted to get to court. I guess now, I lost everything anyway." 36. Dorice Dee Dee Moore. In 2006, Abraham Shakespeare went from a struggling laborer to a millionaire overnight. With a $30 million Florida lottery jackpot, he chose a lump sum payout, $17 million before taxes. But his fortune would soon become his curse. Abraham was a quiet man, illiterate and deeply loyal to those around him. He didn't ask for fame or fortune, but the moment he claimed that prize, his life took a dark turn. Everyone seemed to want something from him: money, favors, a piece of his success. Overwhelmed and disillusioned, he told a friend, "I'd have been better off broke." Then came Dorice Dee Dee Moore, charismatic and calculating. Moore appeared in Abraham's life in 2008, posing as a writer who wanted to tell his story. In reality, she had other plans. Gaining his trust, she set up a company with Abraham's name, then gave herself full control of his finances. The deception was swift. Properties were transferred, bank accounts drained, and luxury cars, vacations, and shopping sprees followed, all for Moore. By April 2009, Abraham vanished. For months, Moore insisted he was alive vacationing, hiding from the constant pressure of people asking for money. But something didn't add up. Texts from Abraham's phone didn't sound like him. Friends grew suspicious. After all, Abraham couldn't read or write. In late 2009, the missing persons case turned criminal. And in early 2010, investigators followed a tip to a quiet backyard in Plant City, Florida. Beneath a concrete slab buried 5 feet deep, they found the body of Abraham Shakespeare. He had been shot twice. All signs pointed to Moore. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern: forged letters, staged calls, bribes to witnesses. Moore even tried to pay someone $50,000 to take the blame for Abraham's murder. When that failed, she offered hush money to his family and faked messages from him in an attempt to buy time. In one chilling moment, she said to a confidant, "The money was like a curse to him, and now it's become a curse to me." On December 10, 2012, Dee Dee Moore was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge called her cold, calculating, and cruel. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 25 years for using a firearm in a violent felony. Abraham Shakespeare had dreamed of a better life. But his trust, his kindness, and his fortune led him straight into the path of someone who saw him as an opportunity, not a human being. His story is a haunting reminder: not every jackpot leads to joy. Sometimes the real danger isn't what fortune brings, but who it attracts. And as for Dee Dee Moore, she will spend the rest of her life behind bars. Not just for murder, but for betraying a man who believed she was his friend. 37. Narcy NOVACK. In the summer of 2009, 2 members of one of Florida's most prominent hotel families were dead. One in a quiet Fort Lauderdale home, the other in a luxury hotel room just outside New York City. At the center of it all, a former stripper named Narcy NOVACK, wife of the heir to the Fontainebleau hotel empire. Born Narcisa Veliz in Ecuador, Narcy NOVACK had long traded in appearances, beauty charm, and loyalty, though not all of them were real. She married Ben NOVACK Jr., son of the man who built Miami Beach's storied Fontainebleau Hotel, and entered a world of wealth, power, and privilege. But as their 20-year marriage soured, and Ben grew close to another woman, Narcy feared everything she'd built could slip away. And so she devised a plan. On April 4, 2009, Ben's mother, 87-year-old Bernice Novak, was found dead in her Fort Lauderdale home. Authorities ruled it an accident. But just 3 months later, tragedy struck again. On July 12, Ben Novak Jr. was found murdered in his hotel room in Rye Brook, New York. He had been beaten and bound. The scene was brutal, but it also raised questions. The room hadn't been broken into. Nothing was stolen. And Narcy, who had been with him that weekend, wasn't in the room when police arrived. Investigators soon uncovered a trail of deception. Narcy had been jealous, convinced Ben would leave her for another woman. And thanks to a prenuptial agreement, a divorce meant she'd walk away with just $65,000 pennies compared to his $10,000 score. Together with her brother Cristobal Veliz, Narcy recruited hitmen to carry out both murders. Court testimony revealed that Narcy had not only helped plan the killings, she had unlocked the hotel room door to let the killers in and even handed them a pillow to muffle her husband's screams. Chillingly, one of the hitmen later claimed she insisted they blind Ben to ensure he couldn't see another woman. After Ben's death, Narcy quickly began liquidating assets and emptying safe deposit boxes. But the trail of evidence, phone records, bank withdrawals, eyewitnesses, led straight back to her. The murder of Bernice Novak, once dismissed as an accident, was re-examined and reclassified as homicide. In 2012, Narcy and her brother were tried in federal court. The jury found them guilty on multiple counts, including conspiracy, domestic violence, and money laundering. Narcy refused to appear in court for her sentencing. The judge called her actions cowardly and her crimes vile. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Today, Narcy Novak remains behind bars, stripped of her freedom, her wealth, and the fortune she killed to claim. Under Florida's Slayer statute, she forfeited her rights to the estate, leaving her own daughter's children as heirs to the Novak legacy. In the judge's words, Narcy could have chosen divorce, but she chose death. A life of privilege ended not with luxury, but with a prison jumpsuit and a locked cell.